begin our strange and rather horrific present-day story of death metal musician Rodney Duckworth, there are a few facts you should know about an entirely different character. His name was Aleister Alexander Crowley. Crowley was born into a fanatically religious Christian family in England, 1875. As a child, when he would misbehave, his own mother would berate him with all the hellfire and damnation she could muster. She even called him the Beast. This was, of course, a reference to the beast of the Apocalypse from the Holy Bible. He grew to become arguably the most notorious, if not the most influential practitioner of ritual magic and what some might call the dark arts in all of modern-day occultism. The British press even once labeled him as the wickedest man in the world. Curiously, many musicians, mostly of the hard rock variety, have expressed more than just a passing interest in the man. Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones, for example, or Ozzy Osbourne, David Bowie, even the Beatles are reportedly among such rock luminaries. Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page even went so far as to purchase one of the homes in which Crowley once lived. Not surprisingly, then, we could, and we will, add the tortured soul of singer-guitarist Rodney Duckworth to the list. But not yet. We'd be getting ahead of our story. There's one more thing you need to know about Crowley, something that is most essential to our tale. Crowley died heroin-addicted and financially broke at the age of 72 on December 1st, 1947, at a large estate called Netherwood on the southern coast of England. In accordance with his wishes, his body was cremated. Now, ordinarily, that would be the end of it. But nothing in the life, or apparently even in the death, of Aleister Crowley was ordinary. It turns out, a man named Karl Germer, a wealthy German, was living in New Jersey at the time of Crowley's death. Germer and Crowley had been members of the Ordo Templi Orientis, or the OTO for short, an occult organization with links to the Order of the Rosicrucians. Germer became one of Crowley's most dedicated followers, and, well, since Crowley had a talent for squandering away whatever money he managed to scrape together, Germer helped provide him with a livable income for many years. And, as fate would have it, Karl Germer became the recipient of the urn containing Crowley's ashes. Now, what most people don't know is that eventually the urn vanished, just flat out disappeared, and what became of it has remained a mystery until now. And here, my friends, is where our tale begins. Prologue, Part 1, December 23rd, 1947, New Jersey, USA. Karl Germer shivered from the bitter cold as he climbed the concrete steps to the solid oak door of his stately two-story brick home. He retrieved the house key from deep inside the pocket of his woolen overcoat, stomped his feet on the mat to shake the snow from his heavy boots, and entered the house. He removed his coat and hung it on the rack just inside the foyer, and exchanged his boots for the comfort of his old leather slippers. He moved to the living room, put a log on the dwindling fire, and was about to fix himself a brandy when there came a knock at the door. Perturbed by the interruption, he went to the door and opened it. There stood a delivery boy holding a package. "Karl Germer?" the young man inquired. Germer nodded. "Package for you, sir. Christmas present, perhaps?" The young man attempted his best pleasantries in spite of his teeth chattering from the cold. Germer grunted. Christmas was just 2 days away, but it held no significance for him. "Doubt it," he muttered under his heavy dark mustache. The young man seemed not to hear the smug response. "Sign here, please." Germer signed for the package and started to close the door, but noticed the young man was still standing there as if waiting for something. Germer rolled his eyes and drew an impatient breath. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a silver dollar, and handed it to the young man. "Thank you, sir," the young man chirped as he made his way down the steps. "Merry Christmas to you." Germer grunted again, shut the door, and returned to his living room. It was only then that he noticed the return address on the package and realized instantly what had been delivered to him. He'd been expecting it, hoping it might come, but when it didn't arrive several days earlier, he wondered if perhaps it would never arrive at all. Now his whole demeanor was transformed from dour to delight, punctuated by a gleam in his eye. He carefully peeled back the brown paper wrapping, opened the box, and removed the wads of newspaper tightly packed around the cinerary urn containing the ashes of the beast. He removed the object from the box and held it gently, reverently, cradling it in his hands with the tenderness and care typically reserved for the handling of a newborn child. A knowing smile crept across his weathered face. "Aleister, my dear friend, you've arrived." The slick black ceramic urn was simple in form, with a graceful contoured curve, almost pear-shaped, narrower at the base, wider toward the top. The name, Aleister Alexander Crowley, was inscribed in an elegant script, followed by Crowley's date of birth and the date of his passing. There was a single adornment attached to the urn, positioned just above Crowley's name. It was a round ruby-like gem, about the size of a $50. It was oddly faceted, in such a manner as to produce a strange sort of geometric design, the likes of which Germer had never seen. He puzzled over it momentarily, tracing the faceted pattern with his finger as if it might trigger some distant recollection, some memory of having come across such a design anywhere in his extensive experience with magical sigils and talismans. But nothing came to mind. With great care and a sense of excited curiosity, he lifted the lid of the urn and peered inside to see the remains of the man he'd so once admired in life. But gazing down into the opening was like staring into the dark void of death itself. He could see nothing. For a moment he fantasized Crowley's form rising, ghost-like, up and out of the container like the genie emerging from Aladdin's lamp. "I must see you one more time," Germer thought. He tipped the urn until a few particles of ash slid toward the lip of the opening. His elation suddenly turned to melancholy, as a flood of memories rose up from the depths of his past. Memories of his relationship with the most unusual man he had ever known. A man whom he was convinced could turn day into night, black into white, simply through an act of will. Germer's desire to touch the ash, to once again connect with the master, was overwhelming. But dare he? A brief, intense argument ensued between his better judgment and his longing desire. Would it be sacrilege? Yes. No. He brought a finger toward the sacred dust, but at the last moment he stayed his hand. No, he thought. The profane should not touch the sacred. With some reluctance, but knowing it was the right thing to do, he replaced the lid, closing up forever the remains of the beast. Tracing his finger over the strange jewel again, he nodded thoughtfully. Rest in peace, my dear friend. He placed the urn atop the mantel above the fireplace, and the glowing embers of the dying fire abruptly burst into fingers of flame, reaching upward, desperately grasping to hold on to some tiny spark of light. Germer drew a breath and jumped back, momentarily stunned by the pyrotechnic display. Then, suddenly as it began, it was over. The flaming fingers shrinking to nothing and leaving naught but dead, gray ash at the bottom of the grate. Germer released his breath, shook his head, and grinned. Even in death, Crowley could work his magic. "Tomorrow, my friend, we will give you a proper burial. I have the perfect place reserved for you." The next day, Christmas Eve, Germer placed the urn inside an oak wood box that he had constructed weeks ago in preparation for this special occasion. A biting chill was in the air, and the frozen grass crunched beneath his boots as he carried the urn and a shovel across the yard toward the garden where he would bury his friend in a perfect spot beneath a tall pine tree. Having broken through the frozen ground, Germer dug a shallow pit and lowered into it the box containing the precious urn. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small book, tattered, dog-eared, and bound in dark red leather. It was his only copy of Crowley's eminently influential work, Liber Elvelegus, the Book of the Law. It was a strange and prophetic poetic work that Crowley produced in Egypt in 1904. Crowley claimed the text had literally been dictated to him by a mysterious entity, an ethereal being calling itself I Was. In effect, among other things, including hints of a mysterious alphanumeric cipher, the text was an announcement of the coming of a new age beginning that year of 1904. This was to be known as the Aeon of Horus, referring to a god of the Egyptian pantheon, and Crowley was to become the appointed prophet of this new age. This small book was the source of one of the best-known phrases among the world's practitioners of ritual magic. "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." This mantra formed the entire philosophy around which Crowley would conceive and implement his unique brand of magic, and for which he became like a god to those with eyes to see and ears to hear. Germer knew the book by heart and could recite it word for word. Words, magical words, being key elements of ritual magic, were in fact the inspiration behind Germer's choice of what would be his final words of ceremony spoken on this special occasion. He laid the book upon the box and covered the box with the frozen dirt. Standing over the tiny grave on what was now hallowed ground, he recited the short and final verse from the Book of the Law. The ending of the words is the word Abrahadabra. The Book of the Law is written and concealed. Ha. He remained standing over his friend for a few minutes in silence, lost in a sea of memories of days gone by, good and bad, joyful and horrendous, comforting and frightening, unpredictable and completely expected, familiar and strange. These were not just descriptions of the times spent with Crowley. He realized just then, during those solemn moments, that these were reflections of the man himself. Aleister Crowley was all of these things and more. But now he was gone, and for all Germer knew, perhaps the world would soon forget all about the beast altogether. He chuckled. God knows there are plenty of people who wish they could forget him. With that final thought, Germer picked up his shovel and returned to the house for a stiff brandy and the warmth of a roaring fire. In the spring of the following year, Germer decided it was time for a change. He'd not been particularly happy living in New Jersey and had often contemplated a move to sunny California. Now was as good a time as any to do just that. Having made preparations for the move, he certainly had not forgotten his old friend still resting peacefully beneath the pine tree. Travel plans in place, bags packed and ready to go, he grabbed a shovel from the garage and went out to dig up the box containing Crowley's urn. His plan was to take the urn with him on the trip to Malibu, the town he decided would be a good place in which to settle down. There he would rebury the urn in a new plot of ground overlooking the rolling surfs of the blue Pacific Ocean. Within moments of the first dip of the shovel into the well-thawed ground, a confused look came over his face. Where was the box? Surely he had not mistaken the sacred spot. He knew it as well as he knew the back of his own hand. Frantic now, his brow crunched into a look of frenzied confusion. What the hell? Quickly he dug into the ground a few inches to the left, but found nothing. To the right, nothing. Again and again, here, there, still nothing. Breathing heavily, his chest heaving from exhaustion, he stopped digging when, to his horror, he realized the futility of the search. He cursed the ground and heaved the shovel against the tree. His friend was gone. How or why, he could not comprehend. Had Crowley somehow in death risen up and removed his own urn? What other explanation could there be? It was an insane idea, and he knew it, but in the weeks and months that followed, it was the only idea that brought him any peace. And he carried that idea with him to his new home by the sea and eventually into his own grave.